All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Kristin Urquiza. I am the co-founder of Marked by COVID, which is a nonprofit working to uplift stories of loss related to the COVID pandemic. I am so delighted to be joined here today by some incredible advocates and activists in the criminal justice space, as well as a wonderful musician. Our program for today will focus on uplifting stories of loss in and around the criminal justice system. And one of the things that I just wanted to say before we get started is that the pandemic is not over. Every 15 seconds, we lose another American to COVID. Over the course of this 30 minutes together, 120 Americans will die. The burden of this is not being held equally. We know unequivocally that people who have brown skin, black skin, are indigenous, are disproportionately bearing the impact of this virus, that the elderly in nursing homes, people who live and work behind bars, are folks that have been cast aside. Their lives matter. And we are coming together not only to mourn those that have been lost, but also in the radical act of grieving openly, mourning out loud, we are giving ourselves permission to bear witness to the atrocities around us in a radical act to say, we will demand change. And so I just want to say thank you so much for being here today. And before I turn it over, I just want folks to allow yourself an opportunity to really be here. We have 23 minutes together. And I encourage you to take a breath and allow yourself to be in this space, to be with how you feel right now. I know I don't feel great, and I know that I'm not okay. I know that most of us are not okay. I think acknowledging that we're not okay is powerful. Step into your power. Together, we can change this. So I want to say thank you. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for allowing me to be vulnerable. Thank you for allowing yourself to be vulnerable. Without further ado, I'd like to pass the torch over to Topeka Sam and Lewis Reed, our esteemed guests for this call, and allow them to share with you all their stories and their perspective. Thank you both so much for being here, and thank you so much for your work.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so very much for having both my sister Topeka and myself. Unfortunately, this is not a discussion that we should be having. We should be having a celebratory discussion, considering that we are the United States of America. We are the land of the free and home of the brave. We have the brightest, we have the best, we have the most robust people literally in all of the world. However, we are failing. We're failing in our response to people who have been marked by COVID. Especially our brothers and sisters who are incarcerated. And I know that I can probably speak for Topeka, but I'll allow her to speak for herself. But both Topeka and myself are just ecstatic to be participating in this conversation, to add value to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Lewis, for allowing me to speak for myself. I always like to bring a little humor, even in dark spaces, because, those days and nights and days where I sat on a prison bunk in darkness and not knowing what was going to happen the next day, not understanding, the things that were around me, the noises that I heard, and not in the middle of a global pandemic. But it was, God. It was, the voice inside. It was, the melodies of, music that I would listen to at night. It was my sisters and the sisterhood that we were able to build together within those walls, to provide comfort. And to think of all of our sisters and brothers right now who are inside that, unfortunately, there's no such thing as social distancing in prison because everything is so close. But then you also, think about the fact of you can't hug one another, right? I mean, we weren't allowed to, but we did anyway. But even now, you can't. I talk to people often about, the PPE and the mask, and we've Reform Alliance and others have done an incredible job getting masks in. And I talk to my sisters who say that they're giving few and then telling them they have to wash them out. Think about that. When we're told not to do that here. And then, phone calls and no visits and not being able to be connected to your loved ones from outside. And so it was in the darkness. And I know it's through prayer and meditation that we stand with our sisters and our brothers as it relates to how they are feeling, being disconnected, and working with them through whether it's whatever means of communication, spiritual connection that we do right now in these moments. And when they come home, trying to offer support, being released into our communities without, again, proper PPE, having to go into overcrowded shelters, or even worse, the street, not having opportunities to really begin to build and transform their lives. And so, we lean again on our Creator to make sure that they're being covered. And so, for me, it's always a great opportunity to be able to lift up those of us who are most marginalized and vulnerable and forgotten about, but most importantly, to acknowledge God in the middle of it. Because right now, that's all that we have in this moment in this country is God. Thinking about our faith and thinking about our Creator and thinking about our people. We only have each other and God, because unfortunately we cannot depend on our government to take care of us in these dying times. So Lewis, I know that you have additional to add on that in your faith as well.
Yeah, without question. One of the things that I'm reminded of is the story of the Good Samaritan. I think that every person who is watching this, every person in all four corners of this country would feel as though that they are a Good Samaritan. If there is a child dangling from a third-story building, I'm certain that people would take off their garments, run underneath the window, and try to catch that child if that child was going to fall. If we see a car accident, those of us who aren't so glued to our phones and who won't pull out their phones and video tape it, typically we would rush into that situation to try to render aid to that person. But when you think about what the spirit of the Good Samaritan actually is, actually it's found in the book of Luke. And I'm not trying to proselytize anyone, but I just want to talk about very briefly what the true essence of being a Good Samaritan is. Number one, when you look at the situation of the Good Samaritan was an individual who was riding a horse. And the first thing that he did when he saw an individual who was hurting was he got off of his high horse. He got off of his space of privilege. He got off of his space of entitlement, and he got down to where the injured person was to render aid. And so if we are going to be better than before, if we are going to ensure that our brothers and sisters who are behind prison walls are going to be better than they were before, then we have to get outside of our space of privilege. I think about when I served almost 14 years in federal prison. There's a common saying in African-American community that when white America catches a cold, Black America catches the flu. I can tell you that when you are in prison, if white America catches a cold and if black America catches the flu, that means people in prison actually gets Ebola, because there is no room for social distancing. There is no opportunity to be able to create space between you and another individual. Literally, people are stacked on top of each other like sardines. Oh, and by the way, for those of us who are watching and who very well may have reservation and or trepidation about those individuals who are incarcerated, and you guys are saying, well, they are there, and if you shouldn't commit the crime if you don't want to do the time. I want to challenge you. I want to challenge your notion. These aren't throwaway people. In the United States of America, we discard recyclables appropriately. How much more so should we be just empathetic to human potential? And so these people are going to be returning back into our communities. These are our mothers. These are our brothers. These are our sisters, our fathers, our daughters. These are people who add value to the fabric of who we are as a nation. And so I served almost 14 years in federal prison myself. Topeka served time in federal prison herself. If you look at us, you think that you were looking at the finished product, but the fact of the matter is that there was a process that we had to go through. And there was someone who was touched by the feelings of our infirmities who actually rendered aid to us. And rendering aid to us in our situation at that particular point in time was essentially caring about our circumstance, caring about what it was that we were going through, making sure that we was all right. And so we are committed to making sure that the muted voices of those people who are incarcerated, who are literally standing in front of the levees and waiting for them to breach. And, you know, what feels like Hurricane Katrina is going to drown them out in despair. We're going to make sure that they aren't drowned in despair. And we're going to make sure that their voices are buoyant. We're going to make sure that the aid that they need is rendered. And we are going to keep having these conversations and pushing the needle forward to remind folks that these people are coming back into our communities.
Thank you so much, Louis. And just to add a little bit more to that, when we talk about our sisters specifically who are incarcerated, and to your point, making sure that people understand the dynamic of the who and the what. 85% of all women who are incarcerated are mothers. And think about how their children right now who are at home struggling and suffering because they can't see them because of what's happened with COVID. No visits, technology, and there's no money. The kids aren't going to school because of having to do remote learning, not having the technology to do the remote learning. So think about how these impacts are happening disproportionately against people who are in poverty and of color. And so, number one, it's that. Number two, with women, 90% of all women reportedly are survivors of sexual trauma and violence or domestic partner violence. This month being domestic violence month, awareness month, and really understanding that you have women who are presently incarcerated serving life in prison because of really just trying to protect themselves. And now they didn't ask to be sentenced to death sentence, and people are being sentenced to death being incarcerated. And again, we are grateful for the PPE and the things that are going in, but why don't we think about releasing people, right? Let's release people. We have people right now who are there who are saying that, we're ending cash bail, we're ending these bail systems. People of color are punitively incarcerated, even more so because they don't have the money to pay bail. What about releasing people? We have compassionate release. We have different tools that have been put in through different states. And when I talk to the sisters around the country, what's happening again, disproportionately, women aren't being released during COVID, and women of color disproportionately are not being released. And so when you think about how these tools are still using to entrap and kill our community, I think it is critical, that people understand what is happening with inside prisons and jails and how that's also impacting families, and more so the kids. Right? With 10 million kids, Ebony Underwood from We Got Us Now has talked about 10 million kids in this country being impacted by parental incarceration. Think about that. 10 million kids. Go ahead, Louis. I see you have something to add.
Yeah, you brought up Ebony, and I just heard her relatively recently say the same thing. I want to bring one individual in particular. I want to protect her privacy, but I'm in contact with more than 360 people in the federal system alone. And I had a conversation with an individual probably about 2 weeks ago. She is 59 years old. She has pre-existing health conditions. She is currently incarcerated in Tallahassee, Florida. She is in the low level security. She contracted COVID. She contracted COVID not due to social visits, not due to her being out in the community. She contracted COVID through staff to so-called inmate contact. Here's the thing. I got an email 3 days ago from the Bureau of Prisons saying that this inmate no longer has access to core links. I got another email from someone probably about an hour later. And to paraphrase the email, the person said, Mr. Reed, I just wanted to let you know that the person who is aforementioned in this particular situation, unfortunately has passed away. And she passed away being a grandmother of 4. Her sentence was 5 years for Medicaid fraud. 5 years. She was sentenced to 5 years, but she received the penalty of death as a result of COVID-19. And she applied, Topeka, she applied for compassionate release. They stonewalled her application. Her application was pending, at best as I knew. Her application was pending for approximately 4 months. It never even made it past the warden's desk because at the time there had to be an administrative sign-off at the institution level before it actually went to the court. It was on the warden's desk, last I knew, at the time that she passed away. Now we can make the argument that she had underlying conditions and she had predisposition to other issues, et cetera. But the fact of the matter is that she contracted COVID. And we know that if you are in a certain age demographic and you also have these pre-existing conditions, that is like adding gasoline on top of kerosene, on top of jet fuel to a fire that is already burning.
Yes, Louis, and I want to just give a moment for that sister, right? And for her family that had to suffer through that. And it brought me to thinking about some sisters also that we work with who they're taking the risk. Michelle Carter, who's in Virginia, Candace Williams, who's in Virginia. And Virginia actually has a conditional pardon for people who are incarcerated in that state that the NACDL is working on. Karen Morrison, who's the LOHM National Advocate, but also has her organization Fighting for Freedom, where she's advocating for people specifically in Virginia and other places to come home. And they're writing and speaking out and having actual articles written about them in local newspapers, and they're going national. And, when you talked about the federal system, I think about Bernetta Willis, who was sentenced to over 63 years for a FEMA case, the first of its kind, developmentally challenged, didn't even understand the plea that she was taking, has 5 children whom have been struggling the entire time she's been incarcerated, other health conditions outside of mental health conditions, and still is waiting to be released. And so we think about, to your point, Lou, that, there are things that are in place, and it's the discretion of, unfortunately, the institution a lot of times, where they don't even get an opportunity to go past that. And in the federal prison, as you know, is the BP 9, 8.5, 9.5, 11, 13, and all these other processes. And unfortunately, with this sister, you can't even escalate it because then it's too late. And we have to really think about, people, you go to prison, you're sentenced, we're working on decarceration efforts, we're working on legislation to make sure people are coming home, changing conditions of confinement, but people do not go to prison to die. They don't. That is not considered rehabilitation. That is not what this country wants. That's not looking at humanity. Transformation is not doing anything. Locking people up in cages does not work. But in the middle of a global pandemic, it is exasperating death and is keeping families disconnected.
Topeka, Lewis, thank you both. Thank you both so much for sharing, for helping give a voice to people whose lives matter, who should not be put in the position that they're put in. And I am so grateful for your tireless advocacy. I would like to now transition us to honoring a few specific individuals whose lives have been lost behind bars. I would like to also just uplift that it is very difficult sometimes to even know who we've lost, which I think only further exacerbates or it puts a light on just how there's so much happening in this system that we do not know. But without further ado, Tina Reeves, we lost her on April 27th. She was a licensed nurse, and she unfortunately passed away from COVID behind bars. Jana Prince was 43. She was a Salvation Army worker in Louisiana. She passed away on April 6th behind bars. We mourn her loss. We remember her. We vow to continue to fight for her. Andrea Circle Bear, she was incarcerated at a federal prison near Fort Worth. She passed away in April from COVID-19. We mourn the loss of Andrea. Her life mattered. We will never forget her. Faye Brown, she died on May 6th. She was in North Carolina, incarcerated. Her biggest fear was that she was going to die in prison. Faye Brown, your life mattered. I'm so sorry we failed you, but we will continue to fight for you. We will remember you always. Charles Peterson, 78. A parole violation landed him in jail. He died on March 30th. His life mattered. He should not have died from COVID, and we will remember him. Just want to draw people's attention to the Marshall Project, another great resource to learn more about folks who are living and working behind bars. We are now going to take a moment of silence to honor those that we have lost, the folks that we stand to lose, and we will begin now. Thank you. As we close out our time together, I would like to just remind folks that the week of mourning continues offline. There are opportunities to get involved by going to the website weekofmourning.com. Tomorrow's vigil will focus on hardest hit communities, uplifting stories of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color who've been lost to this pandemic. Please feel free to participate on social media as well with the following hashtags so that we can follow and uplift stories that are out there that we have yet to be able to uplift yet. And to close us out, I'd like to introduce Alana Aryan, who is a wonderful musician based in New York. She and I have known each other since college, where we met in 1999, working and volunteering together on children's theater. So Alana, thank you so much for offering up your talent to be with us here today and lead us out in your music.
Thank you. Thank you, Lewis and Topeka, for sharing your experience and helping us to understand how much work we have to do, so much work we have to do. These are words from the prophet Isaiah, who says, Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami, comfort you, my people. We will comfort each other. We will gain strength from each other. We will gain strength from the forces that are greater than us. And we will get through this. Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami, Yomar Elohechem, Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami, Yomar Elohechem. Comfort us in our wilderness. Comfort us as we struggle to take care of one another. Comfort us in our wilderness. Comfort us as we struggle with this world. Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami, Yomar Elohechem, Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami, Yomar Elohechem. Comfort us in our wilderness. Comfort us as we struggle to take care of one another. Comfort us in our wilderness. Comfort us as we struggle with this world. Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami, Yomar Elohechem, Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami, Yomar Elohechem.
Peace be with you all. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. Topeka, Lewis, Alana, thank you so much for sharing your gifts and talents and stories. I believe in each and every one of you and everyone else on this call that together we can get through this if we continue to lean on one another. So please join us here today, tomorrow. Thank you.